The Dane and Derek Show is an uncensored, unfiltered podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description. Hello and welcome back to the Dane and Derek Show, a podcast where two nerdy friends keep in touch and shoot the shit. My name is Benig-Aiello, a writer, director, and very frequent tabletop RPG player. And with me, as always, is my good friend and pal and buddy and the greatest dungeon master of them all, Dane Fogdahl.
Hi. That last one. I'm not going to make any claim to that. I will claim to be pretty good. I really like doing it. I do my best. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm the best ever. I don't think so. I don't think so. Also, I don't think I'd like being the best ever. There's nowhere to improve. You're done. You know.
That is very fair. All right, let
So.
me rescind that. And with me, as always, is my good friend, pal, and buddy, Dane Fogdahl, the pretty good dungeon master.
Hooray! Thank you. All right. So what do we got today?
Okay, so I'm going to let the audience guess the topic by our icebreaker, which is going to be, what is your favorite quote from the topic of today?
Oh, hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. I think when we had our dialogue episode, that might be my favorite line of like dialogue. Period.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
adore that line.
Yeah. I think my favorite line is also that line in this movie, which, if you hadn't guessed already, dear listeners, it is The Princess Bride. Yeah, The Princess Bride. A great movie that I needed to see a lot sooner.
Okay, so couple of things. I have seen this movie on and off my whole life. I have not seen it recently. I meant to watch it over the weekend, but I ended up watching my siblings, and things got a bit out of my control. But I've watched it on and off like my whole life. It's super quotable for me. I have not read the book. Have you? You only just watched the 1987 film.
Correct. I've only seen the movie, and I've only seen the movie once. I've seen clips. I've heard you quote it. I've heard people reference it. I've seen the memes. But I had only seen the movie in its entirety like 2 weeks ago.
All right. Give me your first, just give me your first overall impression.
So I think it's probably the pinnacle of what fantasy movies can be when they're not like a saga or a trilogy or a television show, right? Like, it is so self-contained and one movie that it's a lot of fun. I found it to be quite ahead of its time. I found it to be quite charming. And I was shocked at how, like, not simple it was, but like the movie takes place over like a couple of days. It's not like a long like saga. It's like just like a slice of life, which is pretty wild. And you know, that movie has some like really great casting decisions. It has some really great production design. The sword play, like, I would argue it's one of the last great kind of swashbuckling swordplay movies. They don't really make those kinds of movies anymore. Like the old like 30s like Pirate and Robin Hood and Three Musketeers kind of films. They don't really do that, and it's a film that I think it's a lot like it's both like in honor or in tribute, but also like building upon the ground of that sort of genre of swashbuckling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it really brings out the good parts of swashbuckling, makes fun of the bad parts, and surprisingly is just a wild time. And also, like, Carrie Elwes is just so good.
Right.
So good. He's, you know, like there is no Wesley without Carrie Ellis. Like he's just, I don't know. It's that combination of like flowing locks with that strong jaw, with how he holds a sword and points it, you know, to the sort of timbre of his voice. He really does embody that kind of swashbuckling action star from like 30s and 40s films. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would watch it again. I think it's a great like watch with friends movie.
Totally.
Uh, yeah, and like it's like a perfect D&D adventure. A lot of these like one-off fantasy movies like Dragonheart or The Princess Bride or Willow, they're all like perfect D&D adventures, and you don't really see that in a lot of movies like these days. And I really appreciate that sort of like, yes, it's a fantasy movie. No, we don't need to flesh out the entirety of the world, the multiverse, the pantheon, all the politics. It's a very character driven story that I love. They don't make them like that anymore.
The Princess Bride is not an epic. It isn't.
Hmm.
It's an adventure. That's the thing, right? Like
Yeah.
they don't save the world. Um they sort of depose a shitty ruler and uh save themselves. Like that's it, right? Like
Hmm.
um and Inigo gets revenge, right?
Yeah.
He avenges his father, right? Like that's it, right? Like it's not like if you boil it down, the basic plot of the movie is two people fall in love, one of them seemingly dies, and the other is forced into arranged marriage. He returns, rescues her on and off multiple times, and with a ragtag team of misfits, uh, truly saves the day. That's it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
It's
you call it a fantasy movie, and it is, but it's such gentle fantasy. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it's not high fantasy. It's not epic fantasy. No, there are no wizards with staves calling down bolts of lightning, right?
Yeah.
There are weird animals, right? Like there are the ROUSs, there are the
Yeah.
shrieking eels, you know, there's the fire swamp. There's like fantastical things, but like how fantastic is it really? Like how weird is an ROUS when there are like Tasmanian devils in the world, right? Or like
Yeah.
a shrieking eel. I'm like, that's not even weird for the ocean. Like that, okay, that's a aggressive eel. That's not actually that scary considering what's down in the depths of that of the oceans of this planet, right? Like, and like the fire swamps are a little closer to the fantastic, but like I don't know. Like, have you been to the redwood forests?
I mean, so I've not,
They don't
or if I,
explode, but
yeah,
like
yeah,
the trees are so big it's alien. And like
yeah,
I cannot remember the name of this exact like formation in the world, but like there are beaches where stones form in like perfect hexagonal or octagonal dimensions.
huh,
Um it's like there's wild shit on our planet, right? Like
uh
the
huh,
world of Princess Bride feels adventurous and fantastic, but it's not it doesn't like stretch your belief so bad, you know? Like
yeah,
I find that people who like cannot handle science fiction and fantasy can handle the Princess Bride.
yes, yeah. It's very, you don't need to know, well, because like the Princess Bride relies. What makes the Princess Bride so interesting to me is that it relies on the audience's preconceived notions of the genre and the world,
Yes.
and as a result, you don't need any big explainers. You don't need like the sort of fantastical elements. I feel are less what they're less so the sort of world, and they're more so the characters and the adventure and the presentation of it, because it's presented in the form of a grandfather reading to a grandson. And I think that's what makes it fantasy, is that sort of presentation.
Okay, so here's a question. How do you feel about that frame narrative situation?
What I like about it is that it immediately justifies any of the weird goofs that happen. Like when they fall down that hill,
Yeah.
like, yes, that is probably how this kid is imagining that, right? Like it kind of reframes this story in sort of like a different mindset that I think it takes me back to like being a kid, like reading Greek myths or like watching Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves,
Hmm.
uh, which is arguably another like one of those. It's grounded in reality, but is a fantasy movie, but didn't or like I don't know the Count of Monte Cristo, like a lot of those '90s sort of swashbuckling films that came after Princess Bride.
Yeah.
That I realize now probably we're trying to emulate Princess Bride, but didn't quite get there.
In some
Uh,
ways, yes. And in some
yeah.
ways, I'm not so sure. You know?
hmm Yeah, and so I think the frame narrative. What's interesting about frame narrative is that it it relies on having an unreliable narrator, which I think is super interesting because usually that's used as a technique in like thrillers to like pull the audience in one way of thinking before revealing a big plot twist. Whereas this, it's pretty straightforward. It's used as sort of a comedic gag and a way to break up the story so you can kind of skip around to the exciting parts. You don't have to, it's a way to kind of condense the movie in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I think one thing that I like about this particular frame narrative, I often like having frame narratives like this where, like,
mhm,
and all, but something I particularly find excellent about The Princess Bride is that the one of the characters in the frame narrative has character development.
mhm,
He's not just the boy is not just a vessel for this.
right,
He learns something about love and growing up and how people show they care,
yeah,
over the
mhm,
course of the film. So okay, so I think so. We're gonna do this episode this week on this, and we're gonna do next week's episode on this. So I propose to you this. I think that
uh-huh,
we spend the rest of this episode discussing like wonderful moments and like particular things that stood out to you. And
uh-huh,
like next week, I'd love to talk about like structure, its place in like sort of, for lack of a better term, the canon, whatever the fuck that means. Um,
uh-huh.
and kind of discuss it as like a whole piece. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All right. Name some good moments. You just go. Like
yeah,
what stuff
okay,
stands out to you for having just watched it from the first time? Because like I watched it as a kid, and then like periodically through my life. Like you come at it as an adult, which is super interesting to me.
yeah. The rope climbing scene. It's so ridiculous and insane, and the way they climb the rope, it's like, yes, they could have just used the same clip over and over again, and it would have been just as good. But yeah, the rope climbing scene and some of the humor, like Inigo Montoya being like, if I finish him with my right, it'll be over too quick, so I'm going to use my left. And it's like, wow, they snuck that in there. They really snuck that joke in there,
Yep.
really cleverly, and just obviously, the reveal that they're both not left-handed, uh, and sort of like the plays of honor. Like I love when Wesley is like, or Dread Pirate Roberts at this point in the story, which full spoilers ahead, everybody. He's like, you're a good sword fighter. It's a pity that you have to lose, and just knocks him out. And it's
Yeah.
that coupled with like that quest to like chase after Buttercup, and then like you have this king who is like this great hunter making these like ridiculous sort of like, aha, yes, they went this way, and just re-summarizing briefly what he thinks is happening.
Hmm.
And it's like so silly, coupled with like the intercutting between like you know with like the with Buttercup being kidnapped, and of course like all the henchmen along the way.
Right. It's interesting because the early bit of the film when you are meeting Inigo and Fezzik, um, oh, and the Sicilian's name is escaping me because he's always just the Sicilian in my head.
Yeah.
Um, it's very interesting because it is not clear. Like it's very clear. Like it's not really a spoiler to say that Dread Pirate Roberts is Wesley. Like of course he like. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but the thing about it to me is that it's so unclear who's villainous in all of this, right? Like through the whole sword fight between Wesley and Inigo, it's like the I don't hate anybody here. Like nobody's terrible, and like it's just fun. Like something I noticed as a kid is like the part where there's like the grabbing of the rope and doing like spins around and then like the flip land.
Oh yeah.
If you watch it again, there are like grooves in there, like on the rope, like as a prop, so that the actor can actually do that. I think it's a stunt person. But I think that's hilarious to me that they didn't even
Mhm.
like bother trying to like cover that with camera tricks.
Yeah.
Um, and like that whole area is like it feels like such a set in so many ways, and I really liked that. But
Yeah.
yeah, like they don't feel like villains, like not a one of them. Well, the Sicilian, he doesn't even feel like a villain, he just feels incompetent, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He's like you want it to get resolved so he can rescue Buttercup. Like you don't like you're very like another trial, another trial. Uh I think that's a really good point about how there doesn't no one feels like a villain. Like
No one but the six-fingered man feels
yeah.
fully like a villain. Like Humperdinck feels like a villain, but in like a petulant child way, not in like a
Yes.
like the only person who feels anywhere close to competent. The people who feel confident to me, like in that movie, like everybody's a bunch of just like fucking messes, and then there's like Wesley and the six-fingered man, and those two people feel deeply competent and mildly terrifying. Um,
Yeah.
and then
Oh.
Wesley is like
Uh-huh.
laid low, right? um,
Yes.
for the back half of the movie, which I think is actually kind of incredible.
It is. It is because you take this epitome of like the dashing swashbuckling hero that is going to rescue everyone and sword fight his way through hundreds of guards and he can't do that. And that's so great because now he's got to work with like there's something so charming about that scene and just about that irony, like I can't quite put my finger on it, but it is quite exquisite. Like that is some character level, that is some highly crafted like character and story thinking right there.
Right, because the first part of the movie, it is established how good at shit Wesley is, right? Like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like nothing can stop him, right? Like there's no like he's the best swordsman, and he's physically capable enough to overcome a giant. He's smart and like immune to poison. He like quicksand can't stop him.
Hmm.
Fire, monster, like nothing, right? Um and then they like torture him a bunch, and so now he's just like left with his mind, and which means that other characters have to shine. Like he has to then work on a team, and it's really good work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
I
and
th-
and that's yeah, and it's also just it goes to show, right? Like no hero is invincible.
no.
And that's something you never see today. You never see a hero with a weakness, and I think that it only makes Wesley more lovable when he's like sort of like flopping around being like, well, show me what's going on. Oh geez, like that's a lot of
Yes.
guards.
Or just like impossible.
Yeah,
Why
impossible.
didn't you tell me you had a wheelbarrow?
Yeah.
Like these things are hilarious, right? Like
Hmm.
and and here's the thing is that like I'll come back around to this, but like the fact that Wesley is allowed to be both very heroic and very like a week is something that is really important, and all good things. Okay. Question though.
Yeah.
Uh, Favorite character?
I mean, besides Wesley, I mean, Fezzik and Inigo Montoya, easy.
Yeah,
They're
that's
in a weird way, they're kind of like the protagonists of the story.
yeah. They change like
Yeah, they go on the character arc, which is so
they
funny to me.
yeah. Wesley's character arc already happened. It happens off screen on Dread Pirate Robert's
Yeah.
ship, right?
Hmm.
Um, there is no character development for Wesley. You get to watch him do interesting things, but the characters who grow and change, or I would even argue the character that grows and changes is Inigo, right?
Yeah.
More than
Yeah,
anybody
because
else.
he goes from just being like, like a loser working for a Sicilian to, back to like being a loser after being bested to getting his drive back to realizing he can be more than just a sword for hire to becoming Dread Pirate Roberts. Like there is a whole arc, and
Mm-hmm.
um I mean what's great is that last sword fight where like he's so wounded and should have died,
Yep.
and he keeps fighting. Like that is the epitome of like of what makes these movies and this genre so much fun, is that kind of larger than life sword master, right? Like that sword fight is very akin to like the sword fight in Rob Roy, if you've seen that, starring
Mm-hmm.
Liam Neeson.
Yep.
Because like he gets so cut up, and it's like there's no way he could survive, but he does, and it's wonderful because you want to see him win.
Right. And it's part of the reason I love the line so
Hmm.
much is that it goes from a joke, like it goes from like a kind of silly dream he has to a joke to being very meaningful to a joke back to being like very meaningful again. Like that's
Yeah.
like one of the things that I kind of adore about it is that it's just like,
Hmm.
wow, this line can be so much. And it kind of like, it's fun for me that like dialogue can be so malleable in that way, depending on how it's delivered and timing and
Yeah.
how the score supports it and what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the
100%.
writing in this film?
Because I haven't read the book, I can't say how much of it is like changed, adapted, or like pulled right out of the source material. I think the writing, it's a very talky film, but I don't think the talkiness impedes the ability to just enjoy it from a visual experience. So you could
Hmm.
watch the film with no dialogue, and I'm sure it would be just as good. You would be able to see the emotions. I do think there are some things like the ending monologue, like to the pain. Like that probably has to be said out loud, but you can kind of get the sense, like as the camera slowly pulls in on Wesley as he describes what he's going to do to Humperdinck. You know,
True. Yes.
and there's something terrifying with that stone cold 1,000 yard stare.
Yeah.
It's
I
very interesting.
funnily enough for me, this is a film that I don't think gets away without its dialogue.
Mm,
I think it leans so heavily on its writing.
hmm.
Like you can get the gist of everything, but it is not. I think the writing is part of what elevates it, and then the
Mm,
actors take it to a level beyond that, of course.
yeah,
Um, but I think that the writing lets it be so much, um, be so much more than that it could have been otherwise. Um,
yeah,
all
for
right,
sure.
we are starting to run out of time.
Yes, yes, we
And
are.
I'm also itching to if I'm not careful, I'm going to start going into the structure thing, and then this episode's going to be 40 minutes long. So rapid fire top 5 scenes.
Top five scenes.
Top 5 scenes.
Okay. Um, the first time we meet Inigo Montoya.
Yep.
Um, the the sword fight with Inigo Montoya and Wesley. Uh, to the pain, that ending monologue. I really love the scene with Fezzik at the end with the horses.
Oh yeah.
Such a good scene. The fight with Fezzik and Wesley, and literally, I think probably one of the when they cut back to reality and the kid is like, "Wait, no, finish the story. That can't be how it ends."
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like that's and then they like go back and it's like a flash and it's revealed to be like a dream sequence
Yeah.
that Buttercup was imagining, and I really love that sort of like this because there's that relation, bringing it back to the kid being impatient now and being invested, I think is great. How about you?
Um the Battle of Wits with
Mm,
Vizzini is the name of the
yes,
Sicilian. Vizzini.
Vizzini. Yeah.
Um Battle of Wits for sure is right up there at the top. I just think that shit's hilarious. The final As You Wish, from the grandfather when he leaves. That's
Mm,
really touching to me. The duel between Inigo Montoya and the Six Fingered Man.
yeah.
Um, Miracle Max, just that whole situation is pretty great. Gotta love that.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and this and the quicksand scene in the fire swamp is really striking to me because when I first saw it, it actually scared me. Like I was actually like, I did not like how long the pause was. I
uh
did not like that at all, and then I really, really hated. Um, like I was like the big gasp. Like it's a little corny, but like as a little kid, I was like, no, I would hate that so much. Like it was like terrifying.
yeah,
Yeah.
goodness. Well, yeah, that's gonna do it for our Princess Bride Part 1. Come back next week for Princess Bride Part 2 and Structure, like you suggested, Dane. I'm really curious what your thoughts are on that. Um, this was a lot of fun. I'm enjoying this.
I'm so glad you finally watched this movie. I'm so
Me
glad.
too. Me too. Um, you can see what movies I'm watching on Letterboxd. One of which was The Princess Bride at Derek Aiello. And Dane, where can we find you and your existence these days?
You can find my podcast, Diceology, which is spelled like the science of dice, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.
Alrighty, thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you next time, as you all wish. That was so cheesy.
That's okay.